Welcome to the Environmental Justice Lab podcast. I am your host, Dr. Leslie Joseph. Thank you so much for joining me. On this episode, I want to check in with the water system in Jackson, Mississippi. I want to give a quick recap of what's been going on there in case you're unaware. I want to talk about what's going on with that water system right now. And I want to talk about what's being done to try to fix the water system in Jackson, Mississippi, because it is a very serious, dire situation. Stay tuned. We're going to talk about it. This is the Environmental Justice Lab. Welcome to the Environmental Justice Lab podcast. Today we are talking about Jackson, Mississippi. We're talking about their water system. We're talking about what's going on with it and why it's important for you to know about it. And so in case you're unaware of the situation, let me give you a quick recap of what's been going on with this water system. And so first, just remember that this system in Jackson, Mississippi, a city that's predominantly African American, a city that's the capital of Mississippi, has had historic challenges getting water to its residents for several reasons. We'll talk about them a little bit later. But last fall in September, that this water system entered into the national spotlight and into our consciousness because there was a large flood that took place in Jackson, and it damaged the pumps that were at the main water treatment plant, which, by the way, they were backup pumps that were running because the original pumps weren't working. And so because of this disruption at the plant, the city was without water for a full week. There was no water at all. The residents had to go find water somewhere else because they couldn't even get water out of their faucets. It wasn't even coming out. And so during that time, this was around September of last year, the mayor, he was on TV almost every day saying that he needed help. He needs money. He was calling on the governor, calling on the president, calling on everybody to do whatever they could to send help to the city because there was just no water at all. And so the governor ended up issuing a state of emergency and sending the National Guard to help distribute bottles of water to the residents. Then President Biden, he issued a federal declaration to allow for federal FEMA money to come. And they were trying to put a cap on this situation and try to just get through and deal with the immediate issue of not getting any water. And so they passed out water. People got their water bottles. Eventually, they got the pumps running again. They restored the water pressure. They did their testing, and they got the water back on, which was very great. We're all excited about that. But then the lawsuits started coming because clearly you can't live without water. And so businesses were disrupted, schools, homes, hospitals, all of these places were disrupted by this sudden, week-long lack of water throughout the city. And so the residents sued the city, they sued the mayor, they sued the state, whatever they could do to get some attention and some resources to come and help fix this water problem. The NAACP, they wrote a letter to the governor talking about discrimination, talking about how because Jackson is majority black, they were not getting what they needed to keep their water system up and running. And then they filed a complaint with the EPA, a Title VI complaint. If you're not aware of Title VI, that is the clause in the Civil Rights Act of 1964 that prohibits discrimination based on race, gender, religion, all those things, if you're giving federal money for a project. And they were complaining that that's exactly what was happening with the funding coming to Mississippi, that Jackson wasn't getting any money to help fix their infrastructure. And so they complained to the EPA. They called on the EPA to do an investigation into how that money was being spent. And so the Department of Justice, as a result, came to Jackson, and they opened an investigation and looked into the water situation and the funding for it. And from September throughout the rest of 2022, back and forth, trying to figure out what to do with this water system and how to actually get it fixed. It seemed to be this deep issue that people could not seem to get to the bottom of. How did we get to a point where the water was so unreliable and so bad in this major city in Mississippi? And so the investigation happened. They issued their findings. And as a result, the Department of Justice, the city of Jackson, and the state of Mississippi agreed to appoint what they called an interim third-party manager. So somebody from the outside of the state who would come in and manage the water system on behalf of the city. And so toward the end of 2022, they hired this person and they got him connected, and he's currently there now managing the water system on behalf of the city of Jackson. I looked this guy up. His name is Hennepin. He's a professional engineer. He has 40 years of experience, according to his bio, in public works. He was the director of public works in the city of Hampton, Virginia, and he was with the U.S. Water Alliance. If you are a consultant or if you are a water expert, you know about the Hampton Roads Sanitation District, the HRSD. That's where he worked, one of the premier districts in the country who has standards and ways of doing things that are adopted by other cities across the country because of the high quality they produce. And so this is a good person to have on this job and a good person to have involved with the city of Jackson. And I imagine that without this intervention, the city wouldn't be able to get somebody with these qualifications to come and address the issues in the city. And so he has a mandate. He has a list of priority projects to get the city back on track. And he has a lot of initiatives that he wants to put in place. And he wants to really shift and change the way things are done in Jackson, which is great, which is very exciting, which is something that they've been clamoring for years and years and years and years. And so it's really interesting to see this person there and to think about what he's going to be able to do in ushering in hopefully a new way of even thinking about how water is managed and how the system is maintained in Jackson. So we went from September, big flood, plant shut down, no water, national outcry, on the news, on Twitter, on Instagram, on TikTok, every news outlet, CBS, NBC, NPR, all the big stations trying to get the message out to the point where the EPA got involved, the NAACP got involved, the Department of Justice got involved, and they've replaced whoever was previously working and managing that system with this third-party person. And so it feels like a win. It feels like a good thing. Side note, the governor of Mississippi, it's well documented that the governor of Mississippi and the mayor of Jackson don't really get along. It's unfortunate, but it's true. Different political parties, different ideologies, different perspectives on how to run things. And I imagine there's more to it than that, but they just don't get along. And so when they announced that there was going to be a third-party manager, this is what he tweeted. He said, "It is excellent news for anyone who cares about the people of Jackson that the mayor will no longer be overseeing the city's water system. It is now out of the city's control and will be overseen by a federal court." I just thought that was interesting. So he looks at this situation somehow as a victory, something to celebrate. This idea that this federally installed individual will be running the system. And I imagine that he understands that Jackson is inside of his state. Like, he's the governor. Jackson is the capital of his state where he's the governor. And so if anything, he is just as responsible for why the system is in such bad shape that a federal agency had to bring in a third party to fix it. I mean, he is the governor. He has the power to make things better in Jackson. He has the ability to get Jackson the money it needs. And he has the ability to work with the city and to work with the officials there to improve the situation there. But it doesn't seem like he did. I don't think he did. What he seemed to do is celebrate when somebody else was installed to deal with the water system there. And so I thought that was really interesting. And it says a lot to me about how we view and how we understand accountability and responsibility when people are at stake, when we're dealing with these basic needs like water. Because if the city can't do it, if the county can't do it, the governor, the state should be ultimately responsible for ensuring that these basic needs are met. And obviously, if he can't do it either, you appeal to the federal government for assistance and for help. And then you work with those officials to make sure that everybody has what they need. And so, I'm just disappointed that a governor would have this response to this type of action, as opposed to feeling just as culpable for the lack of clean water that Jackson residents are experiencing and lamenting that it got to this point where somebody had to come in from the outside to help fix it. And so it's just a thought I had. And so it's tough. It's really difficult. Maintaining a water system for a capital city is not an easy thing to do. Water lines are breaking. In Jackson, they have continuous boil water advisories. You just don't know what you're going to get each day when you wake up and turn the water on, because the system is in such bad shape from so many years of neglect. And even as I record this episode, the public schools in Jackson went to remote learning because of the water issues. There wasn't enough clean water in the school to have class. And so these students had to go home and learn from home. And so that's what we've gotten to. And it's just really upsetting that this type of city has to deal with those kind of issues over and over and over again. And so that's the basic situation that we're in right now as it relates to Jackson's water system. Decades of being neglected, decades of not having enough funding, resources, personnel, what you need to run and maintain a system. And I imagine the trust is just gone. If you live there, if you work there, I doubt that you have any confidence in your leadership because of what's been going on. But there is some good news. So just yesterday, the mayor announced that they're going to get $800 million for the water system, which is incredible. He was on TV talking about how he needs $1 billion for the water system to be fixed. $800 million is not $1 billion with a B, but it's still a lot of money and it can do a lot of good. And so I'm excited about that. That's good news. Things are actually getting done to move the situation forward and to help address these issues. So you have the EPA paying attention, the Department of Justice paying attention. You have a third party coming in from the outside with experience and qualifications to help run things. And they're getting real money. It's not $5 million here, $10 million there. This is $800 million. And so that is very, very exciting to see and to hear and to recognize, especially with all the issues that they're having. But when I stop and think about it, I think, it shouldn't really take all this to get this type of city these resources. Think about what happened. So it took a flood that knocked out their plant. So the water was off for weeks. When it came back on, it couldn't be consumed. You had multiple lawsuits, complaints from the NAACP. You had the EPA come in multiple times with the Department of Justice to investigate. And it wasn't until that report was complete that you then get the funding and the personnel to fix the issue. It never ceases to amaze me how much time, how much money, how much advocacy, how many resources are needed to fight and push back against these environmental justice and these environmental racism issues. That's what we have here. This is what it took. In any other capital city in the country, you have a situation with the water like this, it gets resolved. If it doesn't get resolved, the state comes in. If the state can't do it, there's always money available from some source when they need it to get the problems fixed. But it seems like for a city like Jackson, they're 85% African American. They're low income, 25% live below the poverty line, which is way above the national average. And they're always consistently neglected and overlooked and disregarded, even though it's the capital city of the state. It's just really frustrating. And this has to be a word of caution for all of us in this space, fighting for change, fighting for justice, fighting for equality. This is a long battle, because let's not forget, this didn't just happen over the last 6 months. This water system has been bad for decades. Some people grew up in Jackson never having a reliable water source, never having what they needed to take care of their families, to do their jobs, to stay healthy. They didn't have any of that. So we got to think about that for a second and really let that sink in. This is a lesson for us, because there's lots of Jackson, Mississippi's out there, all across the country, all across the world. And we want things to be different. We want people to have what they need to live the lives they want to live. But it's going to take a lot of fighting and a lot of effort. And it's going to take a lot of us extending ourselves and pushing people to do the right thing and to make change from the top down. Federal government, we're talking about presidents and Congress, down to the state level, we're talking about governors and state legislators. We're talking about mayors, city managers. We're talking about people on city councils. Everyone, they all need to be pushed and prodded if they're unwilling to do so. You know, there's a famous Martin Luther King quote. I hear it a lot, and I'm sure you've heard it too. And it says, "The arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice." And I agree. I think that's true. I think that in the end, justice wins. And in the end, love wins. In the end, the truth wins. And in the end, those who are marginalized and vulnerable will be lifted up and they'll get what they need. But it doesn't just bend on its own. It doesn't just bend by itself. It's not magic. And it's not assumed. People are involved. Movements are involved. There's a reason why it's bending. People are bending it. People are working hard on the ground, in your universities, in your community, at your job, to bend this arc toward justice. Every advance that you've seen, every advance that this country has experienced, has been the result of someone or somebody or some group or some institution working toward that end. From civil rights, voting rights, education, economic justice, anything that you can point to say is better now than it used to be, it's because somebody put in the work and somebody actually fought for it. And the same thing is happening here. It's 2023, and after decades of disinvestment, disregard, this water system is now getting this money, is now having opportunity to fix the problems. And I know a lot of people have different reasons for why that is and why it's coming now versus later. You could point to leadership, you could point to governance, you could point to different things. But in the end, it's the people and it's the advocacy and it's the attention and it's the fight of the people who live there, who are on the ground, that brought this to pass and that allowed this to take place. And so that's the big lesson that we can take from this particular instance. And we can move forward understanding that if we want to see change, if we want to see things different than what they currently are, no matter what it is, we are going to have to do it. We're going to have to organize, advocate, do your research, go to the meetings, let your voice be heard, speak out, use your platforms, use your social media, use whatever's at your disposal to continue to put the issues in front of people who can make a difference and who have access to the resources that can make a difference. That's what we need to do. And I applaud Jackson, Mississippi, because people could have abandoned the city. They could have just moved out. They could have just given up hope. And they could have just said, hey, things will never change. It'll never get better. It'll never be anything more than what it is right now. But they didn't do that. What they ended up doing was continuing to fight, continuing to speak out. They lived there and they demanded better for their community. And slowly but surely it's coming. 800 million now, we'll see the improvements. You might not know this, but that's just the water system. All the engineers know that the sewer system is probably in just as bad of a shape as the water system. It needs $1 billion too. It needs a lot of investment too. It needs a lot of people paying attention, because when you have a poor sewer system, it compromises sources of water that you would use to prepare your drinking water for the residents. And so there's problems there. It's not just infrastructure. It's not just we need some money. It's we need people who care about the people who live there. We need people who understand the legacy of environmental racism, environmental injustice. People need to understand that and know that that's what's under all the issues that we're dealing with. And once we address that, once we can lift up the dignity and humanity of the people that live there, we can see real, lasting, formidable change take place. And not just simply some quick check writing to keep people quiet or blaming others for what the situation is. No, it goes deeper than that. And so I'm going to keep up with the Jackson water system. I'm going to see how this money gets used. I'm going to be very interested to see the kind of improvements that they make and how they move forward with this kind of initial boost of funding that they're receiving at the beginning of the year. And so it's really exciting to see. And let me know what you think. Have you been keeping up with this situation? Are you aware of others that are like it in other marginalized communities, other minority communities, other places that are vulnerable and marginalized? I would love to learn more about other places that are dealing with the same issue and how they're addressing it and how they're working towards a resolution. So send me a message, email, Facebook, Instagram, whatever you want to do, however you communicate online. Tell me about those situations. Tell me what's going on. Let me know. Thank you for listening. I'm Dr. Joseph. This is the Environmental Justice Lab podcast, and we are for the people and for the planet. See you next time.